Ever seen how a bodybuilder walks? Okay, maybe that's a bit much, but let's be real. It's not far off from how a lot of lifters move. And if you train like them without being mindful, you might find yourself moving the same way in a few years. This is exactly why I don't train like everyone else, because I don't want to move like them. That's why my approach isn't just about aesthetics. It's about how you move and feel. And when you focus on that, looking better becomes a natural byproduct. My goal is to convince you to focus on improving your movement ability and living pain-free, rather than just chasing lean, ripped, and aesthetic. In my early 20s, I became a professional natural bodybuilder. Yeah, no steroids, no performance enhancers, but hey, feel free to drop a comment, natty or not. Even though I carried a lot of muscle, I was stiff, rigid, and inflexible. People thought I looked great, but I knew I moved like the Tin Man. Sure, I could lift heavy weights, but also found myself bracing myself just to tie my shoes. My joints hurt, jump roping hurt my knees. Running? Completely out of the question. And that's when it hit me. What's the point of looking like an athlete if you can't move like one? That's when I decided I needed to make a change. I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in December of 2015. And since then, I've competed extensively, winning 2 Masters World titles at brown belt. This year, I earned my black belt from Professor Cassio Wernick. After a few early injuries in my jiu-jitsu journey, I realized that lifting was essential for staying structurally strong. Because let's face it, I'm fighting people every day. However, as I moved away from traditional weightlifting, I noticed something interesting. Even though I wasn't lifting as heavy, my movement ability improved, my strength remained intact, and my bone density increased. A topic I'm going to dive into later. Many athletes and martial artists say that lifting weights makes them feel stiff and immobile, and they're not entirely wrong. Some of the greatest athletes like Bo Jackson, Herschel Walker, Larry Bird, Steve Adams, they barely spent any time in the gym. When athletes overdo traditional lifting, they develop adaptations like spinal rigidity, muscle imbalances, reduced flexibility and mobility, and sometimes loss of speed and agility. If taken too far, these adaptations can leave athletes stiff and less dynamic. You can see it in the walk. And keep in mind, I used to walk like this too. No shade to any of these educators. I respect all of them. But the thing is, I don't want to move like any of them. I know how it feels. Many lifters walk stiffly because they've lost access to their spinal engine, the natural figure 8 rotation of the spine that powers efficient movement. I've explained this a small bit in this video explaining rope flow, but let's get deeper into it. You see, the spine moves in multiple ways. And I would add in 2 more movements that you won't find in any textbook. The backside and frontside coil, popularized by David Weck. These combine lateral flexion with either flexion or extension of the spine. You'll see these 2 pop up in a lot of martial arts. The traditional view is that the hands and legs are the primary drivers of locomotion, but the spinal engine theory flips that idea on its head. The spinal engine, popularized by Dr. Serge Grakovetsky, suggests that the spine is the primary driver of movement. The limbs follow the spine's rotation. If you need proof, check out this patient. He doesn't have any arms or legs, yet his spinal rotation propels him forward through space. If the arms and legs were the main drivers of locomotion, how's this possible? So when you train too much compression through traditional forms of lifting, keeping the spine in a neutral position constantly in training, your movement will reflect that. Your walk will be stiff, you'll become inflexible, immobile, and you might feel like it's unsafe for your body to move into certain deep ranges of motion. And it's not necessarily your fault. The way you train or don't train your spine makes you feel that way, because you're not training your full spinal engine. You're training your muscles in isolation while compressing your spine and keeping it perfectly neutral all the time. Your pelvis also plays a huge role in this theory. Here's an example. As the spine rotates to the right, the left hip moves forward, driving the left leg forward for propulsion. And as the spine rotates to the left, the right hip moves forward, driving the right leg forward for propulsion. You can also see this in the pelvis of the man with no arms or legs. Now, before I get to the last part of the theory, I want to mention the elephant in the room. Critics of the theory believe that it's still the muscles of the legs and arms that drive propulsion. But I think the thing we need to realize is that it all works together, just like the third crucial aspect of this theory. There's a remarkable tissue that surrounds and permeates every muscle, ligament, and tendon in your body. yet it's overlooked. It helps you transmit force efficiently, it can store and release elastic energy, and it's an essential support structure for your posture and your joints. And here's something fascinating. It makes up at least 20% of your total body weight. It's not muscle, it's not bone. Can you guess what it is? I'm gonna give you a second.
Fascia.
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 It's your fascia, and it's a living, elastic tissue. Grab this book if you want to learn more about fascia, and let me tell you, you do. There are ways you can take care of your fascia, like working on your soft tissue through pressure and massage, which I talked about in this video here. So check that out if you want to learn more. I also have a full soft tissue care course in the Stronger Human community link below. But I want to take a second and let you hear about fascia from a man who's likely cut into more cadavers and touched more fascia than any human being, living or dead. Gil Hedley has spent his life dissecting and researching cadavers to expand our knowledge on the human body. Listen to his beautiful explanation.
Fascia is aggregate of connective tissues that can be dissected into a sheet. That would be a real basic definition of fascia. It wraps around other tissues, so you can define it in a negative that way. But fascia also is a living matrix of your body, right? It's that in which everything else is growing and taking form. It's the shaping element of your body, but it's also a whole body communication system, right? Because forces transmit through it. Yeah. So your forces of just your gait or your stepping, your movements, your behaviors, your emotional life, all those forces are going through the fascial network and impacting the whole body. My friends Rosemary Fidus and Louis Schultz called an endless web. That endless web is the fascial matrix of your body.
You can also train your fascia through movement. You see, lack of holistic movement is the main reason why fascia becomes stiff. The sedentary lifestyle, tissue dehydration, lack of walking, and full body coordinated movement leads to fascial adhesions and stiffness that make movement worse. All right, guys, this next part with Gil Hedley is meaty and packed with amazing concepts when it comes to fascia that you don't want to miss. But it's 3 minutes, so if you do want to skip it, go to 1032, but don't skip it.
Tissues that have differential movement in the musculoskeletal system have that differential movement because intervening between the two moving tissues is another tissue. And that is continuous, tissue, tissue, tissue. But the one in between is slippery, wet, and membranous, whereas these ones might be muscle fibers. So you have muscle fiber group, and between them a membrane. So there can be activity in one group of muscle fibers when there's no activity in this group of muscle fibers. And we do that all day long. You don't recruit every muscle fiber in a given muscle group every time you do something. If you did, you'd have a Charlie horse. That sucks, right? That's when all of the motor units of your calf are firing at the same time. That's not functional, right? But what is functional is some on, some off. And what permits some on and some off to happen is that there's membrane in between them. But if the quality, if the status of that membrane changes, right, and loses some of its slipperiness in any gradation from 100% to zero, right? So we have 100% slipperiness, and say you lose 10% of your slipperiness throughout that tissue, and it's a little gluier, a little gummier, it's not as slippery. It's getting more viscous. It's getting thicker. Why? Could be dehydrated. Could have certain chemistry that's suboptimal. Could be underused. Could be inflamed. These different factors are going to contribute to a reduction of the capacity of there to be differential movement way down low inside of the system. And it can go further. If you have a place in your body that's chronically not used, that's chronically inflamed, right, then ultimately you're going to start generating like crystal formations inside of that membrane, and it's going to move from gummy towards brittle even, right?
It might even calcify.
It could calcify. Yeah, it could do that. And then that tendon's at risk of snapping, right? And the differential movement is being reduced over time, right? From lack of use or from chronic inflammation. Stasis, dehydration, and inflammation cause adhesion, right? And movement is the opposite, use, right? So once you activate those tissues, they're like, oh, this is what we do. We do this. And then your body's going to bring fluid to that area and things are going to get improved. Because
even the pressure on the muscle is kind of movement in a way.
Absolutely.
And stretching in some degree.
It is, or the elbow of a rolfer or a body worker, right? Some PT, what have you, right? You put pressure, you call for movement, right? Someone wiggles their foot while your arm is on their calf, and you are literally changing the texture of the tissue, both at a neurological level, but also at a physiological level in terms of the viscosity of the interfaces of the tissue, right? You can bring back fluidity to tissues through movement, whether it's yours or whether it's through help.
This is why I'm serious about taking care of my soft tissue with pressure and massage. A lot of coaches say this doesn't make a difference, and well,
that's kind of ridiculous, actually, to say you can't do it. And those people who say you can't do it won't do it, and they can sit on their asses and turn into wood. You know?
Fuck you.
Now, here's a good example of fascia at work. Someone who has trained their muscles more than their movement, and someone who's trained their movements more than their muscles. This is an example of the viscoelasticity of fascia at work and how it helps with effortless movement ability. All right, let's talk about viscoelasticity. When jumping rope, the Achilles tendon and the surrounding fascia store energy when you land on your foot and release it when you push off, making your jump more efficient. Now, without access to that elasticity, your jump won't be as smooth. It'll lack that bouncy, effortless look and feel. You might feel the tension go to your knees, lower back, and you'll probably tire out quickly. Fascia's viscoelastic nature helps in absorbing shocks and protecting muscles, tendons, and joints from excessive force. When a sudden impact occurs when jumping, the viscous aspect of fascia dissipates some of the energy through the body more efficiently. Now, the elastic part helps the tissue recoil without damage. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to fascia. You should really check out that podcast we did with Gil because it was truly eye-opening. So we've got to ask, why does this happen? How can an athlete be so strong and muscular but move so poorly? Well, it's because as humans, we're a pretty amazing species. Our structure adapts to the stress placed upon it. For example, as you get better at squatting a barbell and you squat more and more weight, you'll develop neuromuscular adaptations, strength, and bone density needed to move the weight safely. You don't want your spine to move under that weight. So you also develop a level of spinal rigidity so it becomes resistant to flexion and extension. These positions wouldn't be safe if you're squatting and deadlifting hundreds of pounds. I was a pro natural bodybuilder and an elite level powerlifter. And let me tell you, at this time in my life, my dynamic movement ability was trash. I definitely didn't run, jumping hurt, and sprinting proficiently was an absolute pipe dream. That's why I totally changed the way I train, and it's not what most other strength coaches are telling you to do. Actually, they'd probably roll their eyes at some of what I'm about to tell you, but once again,
I don't care.
I don't want to move like any of them. I don't want to be stiff, rigid, and inflexible. I want to be strong while having the ability to move dynamically and athletically. And I don't want to deal with chronic pain. So now, I'm going to give you a quick rundown on my system for training my spinal engine so that I can still gain muscle, strength, bone density, but most importantly, move well. And quick note before we dive in. I have a video coming up about bone density, and you always hear that after 30, your bone density starts to decline. But here's something interesting. I'm 32 years old. And back in May, my bone density T-score was 7.2. By October, it had increased to 7.7. This is the biggest boost in my bone density since I've had it tested in the past 8 years. And for context, a score of 7.7 means my bone density is 7.7 standard deviations above the mean. We'll talk more about this in the next video. The first step in training the spinal engine is learning to coordinate it through space. The foundational movement practice for this capacity is rope flow. I've talked about it in a lot of my videos, and you can get a detailed rundown in the video here. This practice allows me to train the natural figure 8 rotation the spine creates in movement. I'm also able to train rotation on both sides of the body, so I build movement symmetry. I make the proficiency of the left side of my body catch up to my right. We all have a weak and strong side, and the rope helps us fill the gaps. Think about a boxer throwing a right and left, bobbing and weaving. For all my anime fans, the Dempsey roll. When you begin the practice initially, you'll be moving the rope mainly with your arms, but over time, you'll learn to control the rope with your spinal engine and body. I can progress this and increase difficulty with a heavy rope. Heavy ropes teach you how to leverage your skeletal structure so you can move the rope through space in a fluid fashion. If you're only using your arms, you're going to get tired very quickly. But if you learn to use your whole body, your skeletal structure, and your spinal engine, you'll be able to do this for a very long time. And when I say skeletal structure, here's an example that should make this idea click.
When performing a sled push, it'll be hard to get the sled moving if you don't stack your skeletal structure. If my hands are down here, my back is arched, and I try pushing, it's not gonna budge. But if I stack my skeletal structure, I get low, wrists, front of elbows. It becomes much easier to move this sled through space. This is the same concept that we keep in mind when rolling a heavy rope. But now, you're training your skeletal structure dynamically in movement. Your natural contralateral movement of the spine improves. Your weight shifts on both sides of the body for perfect balance.
And if you want to unlock pain-free and effortless movement ability through rope flow, then I have a free course that walks you through the exact steps to get started in just a few short days. You can join the Strong Human community. The link's in the description below. And if you're serious about training differently, and I know you are, then hit that subscribe button and let's take this journey further together. Now, I have other movement practices that help the rotation and fluid movement. The Bulgarian bag, the jump rope, running and sprinting. But the rope is the foundation, the Rosetta Stone of movement that helps with all of this. Now, there's more to training the spinal engine than just the rope. I use other implements to train the engine through movement. Let's talk about lifting. First, I want to say that lifting with a neutral spine in the traditional sense isn't all bad. The squat and deadlifts are great movements. Thing is, I'm not just chasing numbers in the gym. I want strength that translates into fluid, functional movement. This won't take too long to explain. But here are a few concepts that are different from the norm that I keep in mind when I lift. First, I always breathe when I lift. It's rare that I hold my breath or brace my spine and hold a neutral position like we've all been taught. Instead, I've learned to keep a strong core while breathing, which relates better to life. And for me specifically, grappling. Traditional lifting teaches you to brace and hold your breath to move heavy weight. And for that purpose, it makes sense. But it's rare to hold your breath in life, and you definitely wouldn't hold your breath in combat. Instead of picking up the fixed barbell, where the neutral spine is king, I generally opt in for a few different tools. I do still use the barbell from time to time, but it's definitely not my go-to piece of equipment.
I'll start with the sandbag. This will allow me to exude the different movements of the spine through throws and rotations. And even when picking it up, there's some slight rounding of the back. I can also carry this through space and focus on maintaining a strong, solid spine position. It's kind of like carrying a human. And by the way, I'm still breathing into my diaphragm. The training sandbag also allows for even more modalities of movement and spinal rotation. This is key. My movement ability isn't compromised, and I'm building strength through my whole body. I'm learning to move with weight. Now, the next criminally underrated piece of equipment is the sled. Now, of course, you can push and pull the sled. And if the weight's just too heavy, or you don't have the ability to leverage your body to make the sled move, it just won't budge, making it safe for pretty much everyone. I use the sled to improve the body's abilities to create all of the spinal shapes.
I call this the Sled Bible. Now, in book 1 of the Sled Bible, you learn to master moving the sled with a neutral spine. This has to be mastered before extension, flexion, coiling, and dynamic movement through space. Doing these too soon can lead to injury. This is a full body exercise. And once again, I'm leveraging my skeletal structure to move this weight. Now, the kettlebell.
This one's a staple when it comes to functional fitness. It's another amazing tool to train strength and movement ability. And as you become proficient with the bell, you can begin to throw it around. The practice is known as kettlebell juggling, and I like to refer to it as kettlebell flow. It may look dangerous, and when you've never practiced it, it is. That's why you start slow, simple and easy, like everything. Learning fundamental kettlebell moves first, then you throw and catch the kettlebell.
Now, I still like to work my muscles like a bodybuilder. Bigger muscles serve an essential function. You have the potential to generate more strength and power. Additionally, they boost insulin sensitivity and significantly slow the onset of sarcopenia. And I work them in 3 ways. First, I use my body, calisthenics. Mastering my bodyweight skill is invaluable, so I take time to work on that skill in some way, shape, or form every single day. And it's so amazing that a gym isn't needed for this. Next, I still do the classical lifts from time to time. The axial compression forces me to learn to maintain a strong structure under load. Barry Sanders, one of the greatest running backs and most agile athletes in NFL history, remained injury-free throughout his career. Football. He attributes his resilience to weightlifting, a critical factor in thriving in one of the most physically demanding sports on the planet. Personally, between sets of weightlifting, I always incorporate rope flow. When using the heavy rope, I experience natural joint decompression, which helps counteract the compression caused by lifting. It also helps me re-engage my spinal engine, resetting my body after the strain of heavy lifting. I get it. If you're in a gym, rope flow between sets might feel a bit out of place. So, if you need to, try it after your workout.
Now the cable machine. This is where some magic happens, and this is where I like to do my bodybuilding. But I'm not only working my muscles, I'm also working my spinal engine. You see, when I move, my spine is the fulcrum that my body rotates around. So when initiating a bicep curl, I'll rotate my spine, which moves my legs. I can then rotate again for a press. And you gotta note, I'm still always breathing. I do this with all types of movement, and my muscles still reach a state of fatigue that will lead to hypertrophy. But my human movement isn't compromised. I get the benefits of resistance training without the drawbacks. I'm not just isolating muscles, I'm integrating them into movement.
And that's why I don't train like everybody else, because I don't want to move like everybody else. And if you resonate with this and want to learn to train your spinal engine, I've got some cool programs coming your way at the Flow Matrix. Head over to the Stronger Human community and you can learn more about it. Now, if you enjoyed this video was inspired by Goku, and if you want to learn to train like him, check it out. And this video goes to 37 of my favorite habits that help improve my health. Both are solid. I've got a soft spot for the Dragon Ball one though, so maybe you want to check that out.